He got close, then vanished. Why? It started out so well, didn't it? He was texting first, calling just to hear your voice, opening up about things you didn't expect him to share. You felt it, that rare connection, the kind that makes you think, maybe this is different. You started to let your guard down. You let yourself feel safe. You allowed yourself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was going somewhere real. And then, nothing. His texts slowed down. The late night calls disappeared. His eyes, once full of curiosity and presence, now seemed far away, like he was already somewhere else. He didn't say anything was wrong. He didn't end things directly. But emotionally, it was like he left the room and never came back. You're not alone. This happens to women more often than we talk about. One moment, everything feels connected, and the next, you're left staring at your phone, wondering what just happened. And the most frustrating part, there's no clear reason, no fight, no goodbye, just distance, just coldness. So your mind does what every human brain does. When it's confused, it starts writing a story. Maybe I came on too strong. Maybe I said something that scared him. Maybe he found someone better. Maybe I was never enough to begin with. But what if none of those stories are true? What if his pullback wasn't actually about you at all? What if there's a hidden truth behind why so many men go cold right after things start to feel close? Because here's the thing, no one tells you. Getting close can trigger something deep in people, especially in men who've never been taught how to feel safe with emotions. For some men, emotional closeness isn't comforting, it's terrifying. And so instead of leaning in, they pull away, not because you were wrong, but because closeness activated something in them they weren't ready to face. Maybe a fear of being vulnerable, maybe a belief that they'll mess it up, maybe a part of them that never learned how to receive love without running from it. I know this feels unfair. You opened up, you showed up, you cared, and it feels like he punished you for it. But what if I told you his silence isn't rejection, it's protection of himself, not you? And what if the worst part of all this isn't just that he disappeared, but that now you're stuck in the silence trying to make sense of what you didn't break? That's what this video is about. Because once you understand the truth behind his coldness, you'll finally stop blaming yourself for what was never yours to carry. Let's talk about it. He didn't leave when things were bad. He pulled away when things were getting good. And that's what messes with your head. You didn't argue. You didn't demand too much. You didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you were finally starting to connect. And that's exactly when he began to change. Suddenly, he wasn't as present. He got quieter, less consistent. His energy shifted and you could feel it. Even if he never said a word, you thought, wait, what just happened? Here's the part no one tells you. Sometimes when a man gets close to someone emotionally, he panics. It's not because he doesn't care. It's not because he's bored. It's because closeness makes him feel exposed. And being emotionally exposed for many men feels dangerous, not physically, not logically, but emotionally dangerous. He might be the kind of guy who seems confident, cool, charming. He jokes around. He flirts. He even shares some vulnerable stories. But the second you start to see past the surface, the moment you begin touching something real in him, he shuts the door, coldly, quietly, without warning. Because now it's not fun anymore. Now it's intimate. And intimacy for someone who hasn't healed feels like a threat. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff with your heart open, and instead of taking the leap with you, he steps back, because deep down he's not afraid of you, he's afraid of what you make him feel. You didn't push him away, You pulled him in, and that's what triggered his panic. To you, connection feels like closeness. To him, connection can feel like a trap. Why? Because many men grew up in a world that didn't teach them how to hold space for feelings. They were told, man up, don't cry, don't be weak. So guess what happens when a man starts to feel something real? He doesn't know what to do with it. So he does what feels safe. He pulls back. He disappears. He gets cold. And here's the hardest part. He might not even know he's doing it. He just feels overwhelmed, suffocated. Even if you're doing absolutely nothing wrong, it's not logical, it's emotional, and it's coming from a place that existed long before you came into his life. So the next time you're tempted to ask, what did I do wrong? Try asking instead, what did closeness wake up in him that he couldn't handle? Because that's where the truth is hiding. And once you see that, you stop blaming yourself for someone else's emotional escape route. What if his silence isn't coldness? What if it's shame? Let's talk about that. He didn't ghost you because he's cruel. He pulled away because something in him whispered, you're going to mess this up. That voice, that shame. But he'll never call it that. Because shame doesn't speak loudly. It hides in silence, sarcasm, avoidance. And it tells him, you're not good enough for her. She's going to see the real you. You'll never be enough no matter how hard you try. So before you can reject him, he rejects himself. Before you can get too close, he builds a wall. Not because you're wrong for him, but because deep down he believes he's wrong for you. And here's the part that hurts the most. He might actually care about you deeply, but caring makes him feel even more exposed, even more broken, even more terrified that if he lets you in, you'll see all the things he spent years trying to hide. So instead of showing you those parts, he shuts down. Not because he's heartless, but because he's ashamed of the parts of himself he never learned to love. Think about it. He may have grown up being told not to cry, not to feel, not to show weakness, not to be too sensitive. So he learned to fake strength, to hide pain behind confidence, to laugh things off before anyone could see how deeply he feels. And then you came along. You made him feel seen, and being seen felt like a threat, because now he has something to lose. Now he has to hold a mirror to the parts of himself he's been avoiding. Now he has to wonder, what if she sees who I really am? And leaves. So to protect himself, he leaves first. Emotionally, if not physically, he grows cold, not because he's over you, but because loving you feels dangerous. Because you're not just kind, you're safe. And safe is unfamiliar. His shame doesn't know what to do with safe. It knows how to chase, how to sabotage, how to distance. But it doesn't know how to receive love and believe it's real. So he pushes it away. He pushes you away. Not because you were too much, but because you got too close to the part of him he's still ashamed of. And here's the most painful twist. You feel punished for loving him well. You feel rejected for showing up with a real heart. You feel abandoned for being soft in a world that made him hard. But this isn't about your worth. This is about his wound. And until he faces it, until he names the shame and does the inner work, he'll keep pushing away the very thing he secretly wants most. So what do? You stop trying to rescue him from it. You stop shrinking so he'll feel less intimidated. You stop blaming your love for triggering his fear, because love didn't break him. His shame did. And the only way out of shame is through it. But that's a journey only he can choose. You can choose not to carry what he never learned to hold. You can choose to stay soft, even if he couldn't. And that's what we'll talk about next, why he felt something real and ran anyway. You thought he would lean in, because you felt the shift, the eye contact that lingered, the way he opened up. the softness in his voice when he said your name. You felt something real begin to form. And then just as the connection deepened, he started pulling back. Slower replies, fewer compliments. The energy that once flowed so easily between you suddenly felt blocked. And you're left thinking, did I imagine it? Was it just me? But you didn't imagine it. He felt something too. And that's exactly what terrified him. Because for some men, emotional intimacy feels like losing control. They were taught how to flirt, how to pursue, how to impress. But they were never taught what to do when someone sees them, really sees them. So when you saw past his charm into the deeper, more tender parts of him, it didn't make him feel loved. It made him feel exposed. And exposure to someone who's carried pain they've never spoken out loud feels like danger.
You didn't hurt him. You touched something in him that's never felt safe. And instead of saying, "This is scary, but worth it," he told himself, "This is scary, so I need to protect myself." His version of protection: distance, silence, withdrawal. He's not running from you. He's running from the mirror you held up, because your presence made it harder for him to ignore what's unfinished inside him. Here's the part that no one talks about. The fear of being loved is just as real as the fear of being rejected, because being loved means being seen. Being loved means being chosen even with your flaws. Being loved means facing the question, can I actually believe I'm worthy of this? And if the answer inside him is no, he'll sabotage the connection before you can reject him. That's why it feels so sudden, so sharp, so confusing. He goes cold not because he didn't feel it, but because he did.
Because for someone who's lived their whole life hiding behind performance, being loved for who they really are feels like walking around without armor. Naked, vulnerable, scared. You didn't do anything wrong. Your warmth just met someone who didn't know how to hold it. So he backed away before the feelings got deeper, before the stakes got higher, before he had to admit how much you actually mattered. And now you're left wondering, why did he act like I meant something, and then treat me like I didn't? It's not because you didn't mean anything. It's because you meant too much. More than he was ready to admit, more than he was ready to receive, more than he believed he deserved. So he chose safety over growth, comfort over connection, familiar coldness over unfamiliar love. And now you're the one sitting in the silence, trying to understand how something so real could disappear so quickly. That's what we're going to unpack next. Because this silence, it isn't just distance, it's a defense mechanism. Let's go there. They say he doesn't care, that he's cold, detached, unbothered. But that's not the full story. What if the man you think is emotionless is actually full of emotion? He just doesn't know what to do with it. Let's talk about the myth of the emotionless man. Because it's a lie built by culture, reinforced by media, and passed down from father to son. From the time boys are little, they're taught that feelings are a weakness, that crying makes you soft, that expressing hurt makes you less of a man, that vulnerability is something to hide, not something to honor. So what do? They bury it. They learn how to stay quiet, how to fake okay, how to stay in control on the outside even when they're falling apart inside. And by the time they grow into men, they've become so good at hiding, they no longer know how to be seen. That's not lack of feeling. That's emotional survival. So when you come along with your warmth, your openness, your emotional fluency, he doesn't know how to respond. He's drawn to it. He wants it, but he doesn't know how to hold it. Because he's been told his whole life that if he opens up, he'll be judged, mocked, left. So even when he wants to share his fears, he shuts them down. Even when he's hurting, he swallows it, Even when he wants to say, "I miss you," he waits until the feeling fades, and from the outside it looks like he doesn't care. But inside he's fighting a war with feelings he never learned to name. You didn't misread him. He wasn't lying when he looked at you like you were everything. He just didn't have the emotional tools to stay once it got real. Because staying requires more than love. It requires emotional literacy. It requires unlearning decades of shame. It requires being willing to feel deeply even when it's uncomfortable. And not every man is ready for that. Some will confuse love with performance. They'll think showing up is enough until feelings surface and they freeze. They'll confuse your vulnerability with pressure, your honesty with confrontation, your depth with danger. And instead of leaning in, they'll pull away thinking that silence is strength. But you know better now. You know that silence isn't strength, it's unspoken pain. You know that shutting down isn't power, it's protection. And you know that what looks like not caring is often just a man trying to survive a world that never gave him the tools to love well. So the next time you meet someone who goes quiet when things get deep, don't take it as proof you were too much. See it for what it is. Evidence that he was never taught how to meet you at the level you deserved. And that's not your failure. That's his responsibility. You're not asking for too much by wanting emotional connection. You're just finally seeing that not every man is ready to give it. So, where do you go from here? We'll explore that next when the thing you trigger in him is his own shadow. Let's keep going. He didn't shut down because you were too much. He shut down because you got too close. And closeness for him doesn't feel like connection. It feels like danger. Why? Because emotional intimacy, the kind where he's seen, felt, and known, can trigger a survival instinct he's carried for years. The closer you got, the more his walls came up. Not because he didn't care, but because care was never safe where he came from. When a man hasn't healed, love doesn't feel like comfort. It feels like exposure, and exposure means risk. Risk of rejection, risk of judgment, risk of being left after being truly seen. So instead of risking all that, he retreats. He pulls back, he stiffens, he creates distance, not because he wants space from you, but because he's trying to escape the discomfort that love brings up in him. Think of it like this. You didn't walk into his heart. You walked into his trauma. And your presence started unlocking rooms he's kept locked for years. Rooms filled with fear, abandonment, unworthiness. Rooms he promised himself no one would ever see. But your love, soft, steady, honest, knocked on those doors without even trying. You weren't threatening, but intimacy was. Because now he had to feel things he spent years avoiding. Now he had to ask himself, what if she leaves after seeing the real me? Now he had to face emotions that make him feel powerless. And men are taught from a young age, never feel powerless. So he does what he was trained to do. He hides. He pulls into himself. He numbs out, zones out, disconnects, not because he stopped feeling, but because he started feeling too much. And here's the heartbreaking part. You were never the enemy. You were the mirror. You showed him what it feels like to be loved without performance, to be wanted without having to earn it, to be seen and still chosen. And for someone who's never known that kind of love, it's overwhelming. Because if he accepts it, he has to let go of the story he's carried, I'm not lovable as I am. That's why your intimacy didn't make him softer. It made him panic. Because your love tried to rewrite a belief he's lived in for years, and change, even when it's healing, can feel terrifying. So he did what felt safe. He ran, emotionally, quietly, shamefully. Not because you broke something, but because you were getting close to what was already broken. And until he's ready to sit in that room, to face what he's been running from, he'll keep pushing away the very love he claims to want.
So if he left after things got deep, it's not proof that you were too intense. It's proof that you were the first person who made him feel real intimacy, and his survival instinct couldn't handle it yet. So, what now? How do you sit with the pain of someone running, not from you, but from themselves? That's next. You didn't leave. You didn't pull away. You didn't go cold. He did. So why are you the one left hurting the most? Why does his silence feel like your failure? This is the part we rarely say out loud. Sometimes the pain he triggers doesn't even belong to him. It belongs to something much older, much deeper, a wound that started long before he ever showed up. Because when someone pulls away, especially someone you felt safe with, it doesn't just feel like rejection. It feels like abandonment. And abandonment wounds don't whisper. They scream. They scream, I wasn't good enough again. I must have done something wrong. This always happens to me. That's why his coldness cuts so deep. Not because of how short the story was, but because of how closely it mirrored a much older one. Maybe you had to earn love growing up. Maybe you felt invisible no matter how much you tried. Maybe you were taught that closeness always ends in loss. So when he started to retreat, your nervous system recognized the pattern and panicked, even if you knew it wasn't about you, even if you understood the psychology. The body doesn't need logic to feel pain. And this is the silent trap. You begin personalizing someone else's emotional limitations. You begin believing that his inability to stay connected means you are too much, too deep, too emotional, too intense. But what if you're not too much? What if he was simply never equipped to meet you at your depth? This is where the real work begins. Not fixing him, but facing the part of you that still thinks you need to be less to be loved. Because it hurts so much. Not just because he pulled away. It hurts because his pulling away confirmed a belief you've been carrying for years, that if someone leaves, it must mean something's wrong with you. But here's the truth. You didn't do anything wrong. You just loved with your whole heart. And your whole heart bumped into someone who was only half open. So instead of shrinking, blaming, or begging, what if you started grieving? Not just the loss of him, but the weight of believing your enoughness depends on someone else's ability to stay. Because it doesn't. You can feel this pain and not make it your identity. You can feel this rejection and still remember your worth. You can sit in the aftermath of his distance and not let it define what love should feel like. Because love should never feel like you're the only one reaching. So when it hurts this deeply, let that hurt tell the truth. That you loved someone unavailable, because a part of you still thought you had to earn love that stays. But not anymore. You've seen the pattern. You felt the cost. And now you get to choose something different. Next, we'll talk about the illusion of closure and what it really takes to set yourself free. He never gave you a real answer. No goodbye. No conversation, no explanation, just distance, silence, confusion, and yet you can't stop thinking about him. Why? Because when you don't get closure, your mind won't stop trying to find it. This is what most people don't realize. The human brain hates open loops. It wants resolution. It wants to connect the dots. It wants a clean ending, even if that ending is painful. But when someone leaves without words, when they just fade, pull away, disappear, your brain doesn't know where to put the pain, so it keeps spinning, replaying every conversation, analyzing every message, wondering, was it something I said? Something I missed? You start rewriting the story over and over, hoping to find the exact moment it all shifted. That's the mental torture of no closure. It makes you feel like if you just think hard enough, you'll find the answer that finally sets you free. But here's the truth. That answer might never come. And even if it did, it probably wouldn't satisfy the ache. Because what you're grieving isn't just him. You're grieving the ending that never happened.
the conversation you never had, the apology you deserved, the version of you that still believed this was going somewhere, and grief without closure. It lingers. It lingers in quiet moments, in late nights, in dreams. It lingers when you see someone who looks like him, when a song plays that you once shared, when your body remembers what your mind is still trying to forget. This is what no one tells you. Closure isn't just about the other person. It's about reclaiming your story. Because when they vanish without a word, you start making yourself the villain. You say things like, "I should have known better. I always mess things up. I should have been more careful with my heart." But what if none of that is true? What if their silence wasn't a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their limits? What if closure isn't something they give you, but something you create, not by pretending it didn't matter, not by rushing to move on, but by looking at the pain and saying, "Yes, that hurt. Yes, I wanted more. Yes, I deserved better." That's how healing begins. Not when you forget, but when you forgive yourself for needing answers you may never get. And when you finally say, "I don't need his explanation to reclaim my peace." So if you've been stuck in that mental loop, waiting for a message, a reason, a why, let this be the moment you step out of it. Let this be your closure. Because what you're really craving isn't him. It's the part of you that believes you need someone else's words to be okay again. You don't. You can end the story even if he never did. Next, let's talk about how to stop making his silence mean something about you. He went quiet. He pulled away. He said nothing. And somehow that nothing started to mean everything. You told yourself, "If I were different, he would have stayed. If I were better, he would have fought for me. If I mattered, he wouldn't have gone silent." But here's the truth. His silence says more about him than it does about you. Because silence isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's just avoidance. Avoidance of honesty, avoidance of vulnerability, avoidance of emotional responsibility. And yet you made it about you. Because that's what we do when we care. We try to make sense of the absence by filling in the blanks with our own self-blame. But what if you stopped doing that? What if you stopped turning his quiet into a mirror for your worth? Because it's not. His inability to communicate isn't a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of his emotional readiness. You don't need to be less emotional to keep a man interested. You don't need to pretend to be unbothered just to keep someone close. You don't need to become smaller so he doesn't feel overwhelmed by your depth. You just need to stop interpreting his silence as evidence that you're too much. Because you're not. You were just more emotionally available than he knew how to be. And that's not a problem. That's a gift. A gift that the wrong person didn't know how to hold. Here's the shift. Instead of thinking, "What did I do wrong?" start asking, "Why do I think his withdrawal says something about my worth?" That's where freedom begins. Because the moment you stop personalizing his silence, you stop shrinking for people who are emotionally unavailable. You stop chasing conversations with people who aren't ready to talk. You stop trying to decode mixed signals from someone who can't even decode their own feelings. And you start standing in your truth, the truth that you showed up. You were real, you were open, you were kind, and you deserve someone who meets you at that level, not someone who hides from it. So let him be silent, let him be distant, let him sit in the discomfort of his own emotional avoidance. Because that silence, that coldness, it's not yours to fix, it's not yours to carry, it's his work, not your weight. And the more you remember that, the more you reclaim your peace. So the next time his silence tempts you to doubt yourself, pause, breathe, and remind yourself, this isn't about me. Next we'll close with what to take forward, the truth you now carry, and the love you now deserve. So now you know. It wasn't you being too much. It wasn't that you said the wrong thing. It wasn't that you were too emotional, too soft, too deep. It was that he wasn't ready for the kind of love that sees and stays. Let's go back to the beginning for a moment. He got close. Then he went cold. And that sudden shift sent you spiraling, questioning your worth, doubting your intuition, blaming your heart. But the truth, his coldness had more to do with his unhealed wounds than anything you did. You showed up. You opened up. You let yourself feel. And that takes courage. This video wasn't about fixing him. It was about freeing you. Freeing you from the idea that you have to earn someone's voice. Freeing you from the belief that silence equals rejection. Freeing you from the cycle of taking someone else's emotional shutdown and turning it into your shame. So here's what you take with you. You don't need someone to explain why they disappeared to reclaim your peace. You don't need closure to close the chapter. You don't need to carry someone else's inability to stay. You get to move forward, not colder, not harder, but wiser. You get to keep your softness and protect it with boundaries. You get to hold your depth and give it to those who can swim in it, not run from it. And you get to stop asking, what was wrong with me? And start asking what part of me thought I had to prove I was worthy of love. Because the truth is, you already are. If this video found you in the middle of silence, if it helped you feel seen in a place where you've been questioning everything, drop a comment below and write, "I'm done blaming myself." Let that be your declaration. Let it be your line in the sand. And if you're ready for more clarity, more emotional truth, more healing through heartbreak, hit subscribe. We're not done yet. You've spent enough time waiting in someone else's silence. Now it's your turn to speak your truth and walk away with your power. Let's begin again.